Doug should have died on the night the car burst into flames. That was what all of Fairmont Crest believed. The story that had been told and retold for weeks until it hardened into a lazy kind of truth no one wanted to question anymore. But amid the sound of gasoline catching fire, the stench of burning plastic and the wail of sirens bleeding into the night, there were details that had been deliberately blurred out. The body in the car was never identified by DNA, only by a charred ring and a few bone fragments that were difficult to analyze, yet Joey rushed to push everyone into accepting the truth. Vanessa was shoved into the role of widow, and every lingering doubt was smothered under a memorial service arranged far too quickly. Behind it all, the hand that staged the scene did not belong to Joey alone. Randy, the familiar pawn in his dirty schemes, was the one who stood closest to Doug's supposed death. Close enough to see what Joey never saw, close enough to clearly hear the faint breaths of the man he thought he had already left behind. The first moment Randy realized Doug was still alive was not some heroic awakening, but a raw, animal panic. Joey had ordered him to make sure everything burns, sending him with a can of gasoline and a lighter to turn an accident into irrefutable evidence. When the first explosion threw firelight across the shattered glass, Randy was already bracing himself to walk away, to consider the job done, until an odd thud sounded from the twisted metal heap. Doug did not scream, he only groaned weakly, a sound almost swallowed by the crackling fire, but for someone who had fled more than once like Randy, his ears were trained to catch the faintest signs of life when everyone else assumed the end had come. In that split second, all his own near misses resurfaced. Nights hiding in cheap motels, times changing names, the punches Joey had thrown at him for daring to botch an order. He understood that if he played the loyal henchman and let Doug die, he would go on living in Joey's invisible chains for the rest of his life. But if he saved Doug, he opened a new path, one that could be both a chance and a death sentence. The decision was made not out of noble conscience but out of warped survival instinct. Randy put out enough of the fire at the driver's door to drag Doug out, not risking his life in some grand rescue, only trying to pull a dying body out of a coffin engulfed in flames. He called a doctor Joey had used in previous cleanup jobs, someone who knew how to treat injuries without leaving hospital records. But this time Randy didn't mention Joey's name. He rented an old warehouse on the outskirts, built a different story for the doctor. A gambler beaten nearly to death over debts, in need of discreet care. Doug woke in a haze, not knowing who was keeping him or for what purpose, only feeling the searing pain in his body, his lungs scorched by smoke, and remembering that last sound of tires screeching on asphalt as he tried to call Vanessa. When he learned Joey had orchestrated everything, Doug did not explode in rage. He sank into an icy silence instead. That silence frightened Randy more than any screaming could have, because in Doug's not yet healed eyes, he saw a ruthless resolve he had never noticed before. The weeks that followed stretched Randy between two lives until insomnia ate him alive. By day he returned to Fairmont Crest, playing Joey's loyal right-hand man, listening to calls about laundering money, plans to use the casino to legitimize cash from underground networks. He watched Joey walk into Vanessa's house with a bouquet, saw his eyes drop in a rehearsed expression of pain at the sight of Doug's photo on the mantel, heard him speak words of shared grief that Randy knew were nothing but a flawless performance. By night, Randy drove to the warehouse where Doug was slowly recovering, where the air was thick with the smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with the sweat of a man pouring every nerve into two words: stay alive. Doug spoke little, only demanded one thing: information. The names of offshore accounts, Joey's travel schedule, lists of intermediaries, even the smallest habits like how Joey always touched his watch before signing any important document. Randy provided everything, not because he was eager to redeem himself but because he understood that the more he helped Doug prepare, the better his own chances of bargaining for his life if everything blew up. Doug did not choose the simple path of revenge. He could have asked Randy to stage a reversed accident, luring Joey down some dark road and letting fate finish the job for him, but that would have been too easy. What Joey had done was not only attempt to kill him, but steal his life, take his place beside Vanessa, turn her grief into a stage to build his image as the devoted friend. For a man once proud of his control and calculation like Doug, being pushed out of his own story was the greatest humiliation. So he decided not to aim for Joey's death alone, but for the entire power structure Joey stood on. Joey's laundering operations depended on a layered network. Shell companies, offshore accounts in tax havens, retired accountants who still owed favors. Doug questioned Randy about every link, then traced back names he had heard before at medical sponsorship events, charity funds the casino poured money into as camouflage. As a renowned cardiologist before he died, Doug had once had access to magnates, close enough to overhear names dropped casually in conversations that had seemed meaningless at the time. Now those memory fragments became his revenge map. The first tier of revenge began with small distortions in the money flow that only the sharpest criminals would catch. Funds that were supposed to appear in intermediary accounts disappeared right at the audit. Transfers were suddenly delayed by technical errors at the bank. Payments that had seemed guaranteed were unexpectedly frozen pending internal review. Doug did not hack any systems himself. He was no tech genius, but he knew how to buy off people who were sick of working for Joey. An accountant Joey had once humiliated, a bank manager forced to conceal suspicious transactions, a courier cut out of his commission. These people needed only a gentle nudge, a timely deposit, a promise of a way out to accidentally expose cracks. From the shadows, Doug orchestrated everything, making sure every accident looked as if it had sprung from Joey's own greed and carelessness, enough to make his underworld partners start whispering that Joey might be skimming off the top. Once the money pipeline became unstable, Doug shifted to the second tier, attacking Joey's reputation. Joey had crafted the image of a model businessman through community sponsorships at Fairmont Crest, fundraising galas, speeches about social responsibility. Doug dug through all the camera footage, invoices, emails Randy could steal from the casino office while also tapping a few old contacts at the hospital and city council. Anonymous packets began landing in local journalists' mailboxes. Scanned documents of shady transactions between the casino and shell companies, lists of notorious names who had washed clean their cash at the roulette table. Oversight committees in Fairmont Crest, long accustomed to looking the other way, could no longer pretend when the press had smelled blood. Closed-door meetings gradually turned into public rumor. Joey's name stopped being mentioned as a symbol of success, and became a question. Where had his wealth really come from? But the third tier of revenge was where Doug paid the highest price, and where his anger tangled with guilt. To destroy Joey completely, he had to drag Vanessa into the truth, shattering the fragile cocoon she had built to survive the shock of losing her husband. Joey had invested heavily in becoming the only one who understands her, patiently staying by her side, listening, comforting, nudging the boundaries of intimacy bit by bit. Doug did not just want to unmask that lie. He wanted Vanessa to feel in her bones that Joey's presence in her home was an intrusion. He started with tiny details. A song only the two of them had played late at night when the world slept suddenly showed up on a playlist. Delivered anonymously to her house. The special wineglass Doug used on their private dinner nights miraculously returned to its exact spot in the cabinet, although Vanessa was sure she had boxed it away after the funeral. The climax came one evening when she opened her closet and found the scarf that had been a birthday gift long ago, with the crooked stitch on the lower corner a tailoring flaw Doug had once teased her about. She remembered clearly never taking it along when she packed up Doug's things, much less bringing it to the new house. Its appearance here in the space Joey had encouraged her to use to start over, chilled her skin as if she had just touched the hand of the dead. While Vanessa struggled to make sense of these odd signs, Joey began to wobble not only under financial scrutiny but under invisible cracks in his bond with her. He saw her flinch when he touched objects tied to Doug. He noticed her gaze linger a little longer on old photos, saw the forced curve of her smile when he tried to pull her into shared plans. Joey, a seasoned manipulator, was used to measuring reactions in the smallest flicker of an eyelid, and he started to sense something moving beyond his reach. The more he lost control, the more dangerous he became. Randy was the first to bear the weight of his suspicion as Joey started to audit everything. Books, routes, meetings. Randy lived with the feeling that every casual question might be a trap, that every friendly clap on the shoulder might be the last touch before Joey gave the order to have him removed. Randy was herded into a corner exactly as Doug had predicted. On one side stood Joey, capable of killing without leaving a trace, with years of leverage over him through debts and buried secrets. On the other side was Doug, with the steel-cold eyes of a man who had crossed the line between life and death, holding every detail of Randy's involvement in staging his death and then saving him. Doug offered Randy a conditional way out. Help bring Joey down from the inside in exchange for a chance to disappear for real from Fairmont Crest, with enough money to start over. Somewhere Joey's reach couldn't find him. Randy hesitated not out of loyalty to Joey but because he no longer trusted any promise. He knew that when this war ended, whichever man survived, Doug or Joey, would have no use for a witness who knew too much. That sense of being doomed no matter which side he chose sparked another idea. If he could take money from both, if he could maneuver his own escape route before they finished each other off, he might be the only one to slip out of this bloody spiral. Yet Randy's scheme, clever as it was, could not outrun the storm the other two had already unleashed. As Joey's financial web began to split, his underworld partners panicked. Some demanded their money back, some threatened to expose him, others simply cut contact altogether, leaving Joey at the center of a network riddled with holes. Fairmont Crest started buzzing. Compliments turned into quiet suspicions at the bar, at country club dinners. Joey realized he was sliding off his throne as the uncrowned king of the casino and club, while feeling as though someone was snickering in the dark every time he tried to reassert control. When different sources all pointed to the same conclusion. There was a rat inside. Joey whipped around and fixed on Randy. He sent his men to shadow Randy's every move, and it did not take long for them to notice strange late-night drives out of Fairmont Crest toward the outskirts. Once the secret that Doug was alive could no longer be contained, everything fell into a single inevitable trajectory. The final confrontation. Randy was exposed as the double dealer, yanked out of the gray zone he had clung to. In a rage, Joey decided to stage one last cleansing, picking the place where it had all begun. The parking lot where Doug's car had once gone up in flames, now resurfaced but still haunted by old oil stains only the survivors remembered. At the same time, Doug, who had spent months preparing for this moment, released his final pieces of evidence, recordings, documents, photos, to lure Joey out of his last layer of cover. Vanessa was tricked into coming, baited with promises of learning the truth about that night. From different sources she did not know were all leading her to the same spot. She went for one reason only, if there was even the slimmest chance to understand what had really taken her husband from her. She could not turn away. The moment Vanessa stepped into the parking area, under the jaundiced glow of the lights and the wind hissing through rows of silent cars, all performances fell from the men's faces. Doug appeared, no longer a ghost in her memory or a cluster of eerie signs she had wondered if she was imagining. His face bore the marks of fire and time, but his eyes were so familiar her chest clenched in pain. Joey stood there too, stripped of his polished suit and left with a bare, brittle kind of fury. Randy was shoved into the center like prey, trembling between two men who both had ample reasons to kill him. There was no room left for intricate manipulation or excuses, only raw truth and rage stored for far too long. Doug laid everything bare with evidence that could not be denied. Call logs, transactions, an audio recording of Joey ordering the scene to be cleaned, photos of Randy pulling him out of the car. Joey was forced to confront his own reflection in front of the woman he had manipulated and tried to script into his life. But Joey had not come empty-handed either. He hurled back fragments of Doug's past, the dark corners Vanessa had never seen. Times Doug had prioritized surgeries and professional prestige over promises to his wife. funds he had invested in ventures later used by Joey as shell fronts, his thrill at controlling both his patients' lives and the family finances. Doug was no pure victim betrayed by evil. He had once been drawn to the same kind of power Joey now wielded, only stopping at the line of the law until his staged death turned him into something else. Standing between two clashing truths, Vanessa felt her inner world crumble piece by piece. The husband she had idealized was not spotless. The savior friend, who had held her through sleepless nights, was the mastermind. Worse, she realized that all along she had never truly been the subject of her own story. She had been the center others orbited to measure their strength, to prove themselves, to satisfy their hunger to possess a person. Her anger was not only directed at them, but at herself for allowing her steps to be guided, for believing in performances crafted too skillfully. As the piled-up shouting snapped into sudden movement, as one of the men lunged forward, as Randy tried to wedge himself between them in a last-minute attempt to save his own skin by interrupting the impending disaster, Vanessa understood there was only one thing left she could control: the final decision. The gun appeared in her hand like something out of a nightmare. It no longer mattered who it had come from, whether it was Joey's self-defense weapon or something Randy had smuggled in. The moment Vanessa gripped it, the noise around her seemed sucked out of the air, leaving only the pounding of her heart and the crystal-clear realization that if she let the men go on, she would forever remain the prize of the one left standing. The gunshot split the night over Fairmont Crest, tearing through a tug-of-war that had dragged on far too long. Who fell and who remained? Upright could be left ambiguous in the rumors that would spread the next day. The only certainty was that the man who survived, whether named Doug or Joey, would no longer be a good man by any definition. He would simply be the last one standing after a war that had long since crossed every moral line, and Vanessa, her hands still shaking in the dark, finally understood that the true price of stepping out of the victim's role was accepting that she would end the story with the very violence she had once feared.